"Sir, can you have dinner with us?" a little girl asked the lonely black CEO, sitting alone on Christmas. On Christmas Eve, the streets of New York City were buzzing with activity. The sidewalks were lined with festive decorations, and the air was thick with the sounds of holiday cheer. Shoppers hurried through the streets, arms loaded with bags, while the glow of Christmas lights filled the cold winter night. But despite the energy surrounding him, Alexander sat alone on a bench, feeling completely out of place. He had everything anyone could want: a successful career, wealth beyond measure, and a luxurious apartment overlooking the city. Yet, he felt nothing but emptiness inside. His wife had passed away 2 years ago, and since then, he had spent his life drowning in work, avoiding the loneliness that had crept into his heart. Tonight, he watched the crowds with a sense of detachment. He had tried to fill the void with success and material wealth, but it was clear that none of that mattered anymore. His heart ached with the absence of someone to share it all with. Then suddenly his thoughts were interrupted by a small voice. "Sir, do you want to have Christmas Eve dinner with me and my mommy?" Alexander looked up, startled. A young girl, no more than 4 years old, stood before him. She was bundled up in a red coat, her eyes wide with innocence. Her voice was so genuine, so full of hope, that Alexander found himself momentarily speechless. The little girl's simple request hit him in a way he didn't expect. For a moment, he just stared at her, unsure of how to respond. What was this child doing, approaching a complete stranger in the middle of a busy street and asking him to join her family for Christmas dinner? Before he could process his thoughts, the girl's mother appeared, walking toward them from behind. Clara, as Alexander would later learn, had a calm demeanor and a warm smile that immediately put him at ease. She glanced down at her daughter and then looked at Alexander. "I'm sorry if she startled you," Clara said with a soft laugh. "We don't have much family around this time of year, and Lily wanted to make sure we didn't have to spend Christmas Eve alone." There was no sense of obligation in her words, no awkwardness in her smile. It was as though this invitation was just a natural, heartfelt gesture. Clara wasn't asking for anything in return, nor was she trying to impress him with grand gestures or expectations. She was simply offering warmth and company, something Alexander hadn't experienced in a long time. For a brief moment, Alexander hesitated. This was not a situation he was accustomed to. He didn't know these people, and yet, something in the simplicity of the invitation felt different from anything he'd experienced in recent years. It was raw, genuine, and it struck him in a way he couldn't explain. Without really thinking, he nodded. "Yes, I'd love to," he said, his voice coming out softer than he expected. Lily's face lit up with excitement, and she grabbed his hand, pulling him along as Clara led the way. As they walked down the street, Alexander felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. The noise of the city faded, and for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel so alone. It was as if this unexpected invitation, this small act of kindness, had created a bridge between him and something real, a connection he had longed for but had never known how to find. They arrived at Clara's apartment, a small but cozy place just a few blocks away. The warmth inside was a stark contrast to the cold, crowded streets outside. The aroma of freshly cooked food filled the air, and there was a sense of comfort and ease that Alexander hadn't felt in years. Clara and Lily made him feel welcome immediately, and as they sat down to dinner, Alexander realized how much he had missed the simple joy of sharing a meal with others. There was no pretension, no business, just genuine conversation and laughter. As the evening went on, Alexander began to understand something he had been avoiding for so long. Despite all the wealth in the world, it was love, companionship, and human connection that truly made life meaningful. In that small, humble apartment, surrounded by Clara and Lily's warmth, Alexander found something he had been searching for without even realizing it. And in the quiet moments of the evening, he couldn't help but wonder how such a simple invitation had turned into something that would change his life forever. By the end of the night, Alexander knew he had experienced something far more valuable than any success or fortune he had ever gained. The warmth of this family, their kindness, and their openness had awakened something deep within him. He had come seeking nothing more than a holiday dinner, but he left with a renewed sense of purpose, his heart fuller than it had been in years. And in that moment, he realized just how much he had been missing all along. This Christmas Eve was the beginning of something new, something he couldn't have imagined, an unexpected invitation that would change the course of his life. As Alexander walked behind Lily and Clara through the busy streets of New York, he couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between the noisy, cold city and the quiet, comforting warmth that seemed to radiate from the small apartment just a few blocks away. The bustling crowds, the lights flashing from the windows of expensive shops, and the harsh winter air felt distant as he followed the two of them down the street, Lily skipping ahead, her laughter filling the night. With each step, Alexander found himself more intrigued by the simplicity of this moment. There was no pretense, no rush, just a mother and her daughter offering him the most unexpected invitation. A part of him wondered if he was making a mistake, but another part of him, the part that had been hidden away for years, was drawn to them. The quiet, unspoken connection that had formed between them on the bench earlier that evening seemed to be growing stronger, pulling him forward. Lily's excitement was contagious. As they walked, she chattered away, telling Alexander about her favorite Christmas songs, her excitement about the holiday, and how her mom always made the best cookies. Alexander listened, amused by her endless energy and wonder. He hadn't been around children much since his wife's passing, and there was something refreshing about Lily's innocent enthusiasm. It felt like a breath of fresh air in the cold, sterile world he had been living in for so long. Finally, they arrived at the apartment, a modest building tucked away from the chaos of the streets. The hallway was dimly lit, and as they climbed the stairs, Alexander noticed how different it felt from the polished, impersonal spaces he was used to. There was a warmth in the air that seemed to come not just from the building, but from the very people who lived there. It wasn't the kind of warmth that came from wealth or status, but from something far more valuable, love and belonging. When Clara unlocked the door and stepped inside, Alexander was immediately struck by the contrast between the cold city and the inviting atmosphere inside. The apartment was small, but cozy. Christmas lights twinkled from every corner, casting a soft glow over the room. The scent of home-cooked food lingered in the air, mingling with the faint hum of cheerful holiday music playing in the background. The space was filled with simple decorations. Handmade ornaments, a small tree in the corner, and stockings hung with care. It was a far cry from the sleek, sterile modernity of his penthouse. "Make yourself at home," Clara said with a warm smile as she gestured for him to take a seat at the small dining table. Alexander noticed how comfortable Clara seemed in her space, how effortless it was for her to welcome a stranger into her home. He hesitated for a moment, unsure of where to sit, but Lily quickly pulled out a chair for him and grinned. "Mommy says we have the best dinner ever. I hope you like it," she said, her excitement uncontainable. Alexander chuckled, grateful for the childlike enthusiasm that filled the room. He sat down, his mind still processing how surreal this entire situation was. How, just hours ago, he had been alone, wandering the streets of the city, and now here he was, sitting at a warm dinner table with people he barely knew. Clara returned to the kitchen, where she continued to work, her movements smooth and efficient, yet filled with a quiet grace. As she set the table, Alexander watched her. There was no stress in her demeanor, no rush to impress. She was simply sharing the gift of her time, her kindness, and her home. Something about that felt both grounding and humbling to Alexander. In his world, time was always limited, filled with meetings, deadlines, and expectations. But here, time seemed to slow down. It was a rare and precious thing, and he couldn't remember the last time he had truly felt present in a moment like this. When the meal was ready, Clara set the steaming dishes in front of them. The table was filled with hearty, homemade food. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, a salad, and a bowl of warm, freshly baked bread. The aroma was intoxicating, and Alexander couldn't help but smile. It was the kind of meal that spoke of care, of tradition, of love. As they began to eat, Clara and Lily shared stories about their holiday traditions. Clara spoke of how they always decorated the tree together, how Lily had been asking for a special Christmas sweater this year, and how they had made cookies for Santa the night before. Lily, naturally, couldn't wait to tell Alexander about how she had helped decorate the apartment, hanging the ornaments as high as she could reach. She asked him all sorts of questions, from what his favorite holiday song was to what kind of gifts he thought Santa would bring her. Alexander listened, laughing along with their stories, but also marveling at how genuine it all felt. The laughter, the ease, the sense of belonging, he hadn't felt like this in years. The conversations at his high-rise office, the lavish dinners with business partners, the social events filled with faces he barely recognized. None of those interactions had ever made him feel truly connected. But here, in this small, modest apartment, with Clara and Lily, Alexander felt something different. He felt like he was part of something real, something human. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like an outsider. As the evening wore on, Alexander realized how long it had been since he had experienced such warmth, not the kind of warmth that came from expensive heating systems or designer clothes, but the kind that came from human connection. The simplicity of the evening, sitting around a table, sharing food, laughing, and talking, was everything he had been missing. It wasn't the luxury or status that had made him feel empty all these years. It was the absence of something real. Love, companionship, and the sense of being truly seen and valued. By the end of the evening, Alexander didn't want to leave. He had been invited into their world, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. He wasn't just a CEO or a lonely man on a bench. In this moment, he was simply Alexander, a man sitting at a dinner table with a kind woman and her daughter, sharing in the beauty of human connection. And for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known he was searching for. As Clara and Lily showed him out later that evening, Alexander realized that this was more than just a dinner. It was the beginning of something new. It was the start of him finding his way back to the very thing he had been missing for so long: warmth, love, and the genuine connections that make life worth living. Over the following weeks, Alexander found himself thinking more and more about Clara and Lily. What had started as a chance encounter, a simple Christmas Eve invitation, was slowly turning into something far more significant than he had ever anticipated. Every time he visited their modest apartment, something inside him stirred. The laughter of Lily, the quiet wisdom of Clara, and the warmth that seemed to radiate from their small home had begun to fill the emptiness he had carried with him for so long. It was a feeling that, in the world he lived in, he had almost forgotten how to recognize. It started with small moments, dinners that seemed ordinary but were, in fact, anything but. Clara would cook while Lily bounced around, eager to set the table and tell Alexander about her day. The meals were simple, but the time spent together made them feel special. Clara never rushed, never made him feel like an inconvenience. There was always time for stories, laughter, and moments of genuine connection. Alexander couldn't remember the last time he had sat down at a table and felt so present, so alive. Lily, with her boundless energy and innocent questions, had become a constant source of joy. She would tell him about her favorite books, show him her latest drawing, or share an enthusiastic account of the latest school project. Each time she spoke, it was as if the world around him slowed down. Alexander had always been caught up in the whirlwind of his career, meetings, deadlines, presentations, but with Lily, the chaos of his life seemed to fade into the background. She had a way of making everything feel simple and pure. Her laughter, as infectious as it was, became a regular soundtrack to his life. But it wasn't just Lily who was drawing him in. Clara's quiet strength and unwavering devotion to her daughter was impossible to ignore. It was evident in everything she did, from the way she patiently helped Lily with her homework, to the way she always ensured their home was a place of comfort and security. Clara gave so much of herself to Lily, and Alexander couldn't help but admire her for it. She had this quiet way of making everything feel right, even when the world outside seemed like a blur. Watching her with Lily made Alexander realize how much he had been missing in his own life, the kind of love and devotion that wasn't based on obligation or duty, but on something far more enduring. The more time he spent with them, the more Alexander's perspective began to shift. He would help Lily with her schoolwork, sitting beside her as she read aloud, guiding her when she stumbled over words. There was something about those moments that made him feel like he was truly contributing to something worthwhile, something meaningful. The hours spent at the kitchen table, helping Lily with math problems or spelling tests, were the most fulfilling of his week. The satisfaction he once derived from closing a major deal or making a successful business move felt hollow in comparison to the joy of these quiet, simple moments. It was during one of their walks through the nearby park that Alexander found himself struck by the stark difference between the life he had built for himself and the life Clara and Lily shared. They would walk hand in hand, Lily skipping ahead, her energy boundless as she chattered away about the ducks in the pond or the squirrels running along the tree branches. Clara would walk beside Alexander, their pace slow, allowing them to soak in the beauty of the park and the simplicity of the moment. Alexander couldn't help but marvel at the contrast. Here he was, a man who had built an empire, surrounded by luxury and power, yet he had never known peace like this. The hustle and grind that had once consumed him now seemed insignificant in comparison to the serenity that Clara and Lily seemed to find in every moment, no matter how small. He had spent so many years chasing success, convinced that wealth and status were the keys to happiness. But as he walked beside Clara and Lily, with the wind rustling through the trees and the sound of laughter echoing in his ears, he realized how wrong he had been. Despite the success he had built over the years, Alexander realized he had been living in a bubble that had shielded him from the love and human connection that were the true sources of fulfillment. His wealth, his achievements, his impressive career, all of it had been empty without someone to share it with. He had been isolated for too long, hiding behind the walls of his penthouse, surrounded by objects and possessions that could never replace the kind of love that Clara and Lily shared so freely. Each visit, each shared meal, each walk in the park brought a deeper sense of clarity. The more he was around Clara and Lily, the more he understood that what he had been seeking all along was not success or riches, but connection. They didn't have much in terms of material wealth, but what they had in abundance was something Alexander had never truly experienced in his own life: love, laughter, and the bond of family. Their world was simple, but it was filled with everything that mattered. It wasn't long before Alexander began to feel the weight of his own loneliness in a way he hadn't before. He thought back to the years since his wife had passed, to the void that had existed in his life even while he was surrounded by success. For the first time, he recognized that it wasn't just the absence of a partner that had left him hollow, it was the absence of human connection. The truth hit him hard. Despite all the wealth, all the accomplishments, the accolades, and the recognition, he had been living a life devoid of the one thing that truly mattered: love. Love was what made life worth living, what gave meaning to the everyday moments, what filled the silence with warmth. And it was love that he had been missing. In his pursuit of everything else, he had forgotten what it meant to truly care for someone, to be a part of something bigger than himself. In Clara and Lily, Alexander saw the kind of love he had been searching for, the kind of love that wasn't bound by expectations or conditions. It was simple, pure, and unconditional. And as he sat with them in their small apartment, sharing dinner or walking through the park, he began to understand that this was what he had been missing all along. His connection with Clara and Lily was changing him. It was opening his heart to the possibility of a future filled with love, not just business deals and empty achievements. It was showing him that success without connection was an empty victory. And it was teaching him that, even in the most unexpected places, love could be found when you least expected it, when you opened yourself up to the possibility of real, human connection. As the weeks went by, Alexander knew one thing for certain: the more time he spent with Clara and Lily, the more he realized that the wealth he had worked so hard to accumulate could never compare to the wealth of love, family, and connection that they shared. It was one of those quiet, ordinary evenings at Clara's apartment, the kind that Alexander had come to cherish more than he ever thought possible. The soft light of a single lamp cast a warm glow over the small living room, and the rhythmic sound of the radiator humming in the background was the only noise that interrupted the peaceful silence. Clara and Lily were sitting on the couch, laughing over a story Lily was telling. Clara was holding a cup of tea, her smile gentle and easy. Lily's face, as always, was full of wonder, her eyes shining as she recounted an adventure from her day at school. Alexander sat in the armchair across from them, feeling like he had stepped into a different world, a world where joy was found in simple moments, and love didn't need to be earned, only shared. It was then that something shifted inside him. As he watched Clara, her eyes crinkling with laughter, and Lily, her face lighting up with pure joy, Alexander felt a quiet pang in his chest. He looked down at his hands, resting on his lap, and for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to reflect on the life he had led. The life that had been filled with success, with accolades, with wealth. But it had also been filled with emptiness. A deep, gnawing emptiness that no amount of luxury, no number of business deals, could ever fill. He had spent years chasing success, thinking it would somehow fill the void left by his wife's death 2 years ago. Yet, in that moment, he realized the truth that had eluded him for so long. He had been trying to fill a hole in his heart with things that didn't matter. Clara's presence, so warm and steady, and Lily's infectious laughter filled the room with something he hadn't felt in a long time. The love they shared, the simplicity of their lives, the way they could find joy in the smallest things. This was what Alexander had been missing. His mind raced back to his penthouse, to the loneliness he had felt for so long, surrounded by expensive furniture and pristine decor, yet drowning in a sea of isolation. He thought of all the dinners he'd eaten alone, of all the nights spent working late into the hours, thinking that success and wealth would make him feel whole again. But now, as he sat in Clara's cozy living room, he saw how wrong he had been. He had built an empire, thinking that power and money would somehow give his life meaning, but all they had done was push people away. In his pursuit of material success, he had neglected the one thing that truly gave life depth: connection, love, family. He looked at Clara and Lily, their faces so full of warmth, and he realized how deeply he had longed for what they had. Their bond, their ability to share quiet moments, to find happiness in the smallest things, was something he had taken for granted for far too long. He hadn't even realized how much he had been missing until now. It wasn't just Clara and Lily's presence that filled the room. It was their love, their simple, unpretentious connection to each other. They didn't need fancy dinners or extravagant gifts to make each other feel loved. They had something far more valuable, a deep sense of belonging. They had a family, and in that moment, Alexander realized just how much he had craved that feeling of belonging. His mind wandered to the years since his wife's death, to the days he had spent distracted by work, trying to escape the emptiness that lingered in the corners of his heart. The house they had shared was silent now, a place where memories of better times haunted him at every turn. He hadn't realized how much he had closed himself off from the world until Clara and Lily came into his life. The walls he had built, brick by brick, to protect himself from the pain of losing his wife, had also kept out the warmth of human connection. Clara and Lily had cracked those walls open, letting in a warmth he had forgotten was even possible. It wasn't just that they made him feel welcome, it was that they made him feel seen. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a stranger in the world. He felt like part of something real, something he had been missing for so long. It wasn't just the joy of sitting at their dinner table or walking through the park with them. It was the understanding that, in their small, everyday moments, they had something that he had been searching for all along. Love. A love that wasn't conditional, that wasn't tied to success or status. A love that was rooted in something deeper than anything money could buy. As Clara and Lily continued to laugh and talk, Alexander felt something shift inside him. It was as though a weight he hadn't even known he was carrying had been lifted. He realized that, despite all the wealth he had accumulated, it was this love that he had been missing all along. He had been chasing the wrong thing. The things that mattered most were not the number of zeros on his paycheck or the size of his office, but the love that Clara and Lily shared so effortlessly. Their ability to connect, to be present with each other, was something he hadn't known he needed until he had experienced it. In that quiet moment, as the laughter of Clara and Lily filled the room, Alexander finally understood the truth that had eluded him for so long. Love was the only thing that truly mattered. Everything else was just noise, distractions, things that might fill the space but would never truly fill the heart. He had spent years believing that his success was the key to his happiness, but now, sitting in Clara's living room, he saw how wrong he had been. What he truly needed was connection, genuine, human connection. And he had found that in Clara and Lily, in the warmth of their home, in the simplicity of their lives. For the first time in years, Alexander felt his heart open. He realized that he didn't have to keep chasing the things that had kept him distant from the world. He didn't have to hide behind his wealth or his success anymore. What he needed, what he had been missing all along, was the love that Clara and Lily had shown him, the love that made him feel not like a CEO or a lonely man, but simply like someone who belonged. And in that moment, Alexander made a promise to himself. He would never again let success overshadow the things that truly mattered. Because, for the first time in a long time, he understood that the greatest success in life wasn't measured in dollars or accolades, but in the love we give and receive. As the weeks passed, Alexander couldn't deny the growing connection he felt toward Clara. Their bond had deepened in ways he hadn't anticipated, moving from casual dinners and walks in the park to something more profound. He admired her strength. The way she balanced everything with such grace, raising Lily and managing their home with love and care. But it was more than just her strength that pulled him in. It was her kindness, her ability to make him feel seen and valued in ways he hadn't known in years. Yet, for all the closeness they had shared, Alexander couldn't bring himself to admit what was growing in his heart. He was terrified of vulnerability. His life had been built on control, on carefully crafted facades that kept him protected from the world. In business, he could control outcomes. He could measure success. But in matters of the heart, he had no idea how to navigate the territory. Every time he looked at Clara, his feelings swelled. He wanted to tell her how much she meant to him, how her laughter filled the emptiness he had lived with for so long. He wanted to share how, in her presence, the weight of his past seemed to lift, how she made him feel more alive than he had in years. But the words wouldn't come. They were trapped, buried beneath layers of fear and self-doubt. He couldn't risk exposing himself, not after everything he had been through. He couldn't bear the thought of rejection, of being vulnerable and losing the one thing in his life that felt real. Clara, too, felt the pull between them. She had sensed the connection from the start, the way Alexander had become a constant presence in her and Lily's life. His gentleness, his quiet attentiveness, she noticed everything. She saw how he'd changed over time, how he'd allowed himself to let go of some of the walls he had built around himself. But despite the connection they shared, a nagging doubt lingered in Clara's mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone like Alexander, with his wealth, power, and status, could never truly see her for who she was. She had spent so long taking care of Lily, of putting others first, that she couldn't fathom that someone like Alexander would see past her circumstances. He was used to a world of luxury, of perfection, while she lived a quieter, simpler life. One evening, they found themselves sitting together on a bench in the park, the city lights twinkling in the distance. The air was cool, and the sounds of the city seemed muffled, distant. It was a peaceful moment, one of those rare evenings when time seemed to slow down, and all that mattered was the present. Clara was sitting next to him, their shoulders brushing lightly as they both looked out at the lights, lost in thought. Alexander wanted to speak, to share the thoughts that had been swirling in his mind for weeks. He wanted to tell her how much she had come to mean to him, how much he admired her strength, her kindness, and her unwavering dedication to her daughter. But the words felt impossible to say. He was afraid to speak them out loud, afraid of what might happen if he did. Would she feel the same way? Would it change everything? Clara, too, remained silent, her mind racing with unspoken thoughts. She could feel the weight of the moment between them, the quiet understanding that something deeper was growing. She could sense that Alexander was holding back, but she wasn't sure if it was because he didn't feel the same way or because he was simply afraid to admit it. In the stillness of that moment, neither of them spoke, but the connection between them was undeniable. They didn't need words to understand what was happening. It was as if they were both waiting for the right moment to take the next step, but neither of them knew how or when that would be. As the night wore on, they stayed there in silence, the city lights flickering softly around them. The unspoken feelings between them hung in the air, palpable but untouched, like a secret neither of them was ready to confess. But in the quiet of the park, with the world moving around them, they both knew one thing for certain. Something was changing, and whatever it was undeniable. The bond they had formed was too strong to ignore, and the next chapter of their story was waiting to be written, if only they could find the courage to speak the words that had been lingering between them all along. On New Year's Eve, the city buzzed with excitement, fireworks waiting to light up the sky. Alexander, his heart pounding, led Clara and Lily to the park where they had shared so many quiet, meaningful moments. Snowflakes drifted around them, and the Christmas lights still glowed softly in the distance. Stopping in the center of the park, Alexander turned to Clara, his voice full of emotion. In all the time we've spent together, I've learned that love and family are what truly bring joy. Dropping to one knee, he asked, Clara, will you marry me? Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, yes. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, Alexander sat back on the couch, a quiet smile playing on his lips. The warmth of Clara and Lily beside him, the laughter filling the air, and the soft glow of their cozy living room created a feeling he had never known before. It wasn't just the celebration of a new year, it was the celebration of a new life, one he had never imagined but was now so grateful for. The past months had been a whirlwind of moments, small and large, that had brought him closer to Clara and Lily, to a love he had longed for without even realizing it. As he looked around, at the family he had found, he felt a deep sense of peace and fulfillment. The searching, the striving for success and validation had faded away. For the first time, he was no longer chasing something, he had found it. When the clock struck midnight, fireworks lit up the sky, their brilliant colors reflecting the joy and promise of the new year. Alexander felt a weight lift from his shoulders. With Clara and Lily by his side, he knew that the future ahead was bright. A future filled with love, connection, and the beautiful new beginning they had created together. If you enjoyed the story of Alexander, Clara, and Lily, Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the story and how it ended. Rate it on a scale of 1 to 10 and share where you're watching from.